everybody, it's Susan Lindner. I'm back again as your host of the Innovation Storytellers show. So I'm so glad to have with me this week, Debbie Reynolds. Now, I know what you're thinking. That name is already supremely famous, but we're about to make another Debbie Reynolds very famous for a totally different reason. Someone who's able to tap dance around the data and bring great data to the forefront. So if you don't know, Debbie Reynolds, otherwise known as the Data Diva, is a world-renowned technologist, thought leader, and advisor handling global data privacy, cyber data risk, and complex cross-functional data-driven projects. I think that sounds like a lot of you out there, actually. Ms. Reynolds is an internationally published author, a highly sought after speaker, and a top media presence around global data privacy and protection, as well as other emerging technology issues, which is why I asked her to join me today. She has been named to the top 10 global data privacy experts by Market Tech 5 in 2021, and to the global top 30 cyber risk communicators by the European Risk Policy Institute. And, you know, the accolades go on, everything from the American Bar Association and Women in Legal Tech. She has also produced the worldwide #1 data privacy podcast called The Data Diva. And so from one fellow podcaster to another, I am so excited to welcome Debbie Reynolds onto the show today. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you. This is exciting. I love to be able to talk with people in different industries about data stuff. So this is great.
Yeah. So our audience, as you know, Debbie, is global. It is everything in innovation, whether that's consumer packaged goods, heavy manufacturing, and everything in between. So I'm excited because oftentimes this data piece is one that feels like a burden rather than a benefit. And I think that we can change hearts and minds on this show today. So tell us a little bit about how you got your start in the world of data, because I know you were a philosophy major in college, right? I was an anthropology major in college. And so we all didn't start with data in our hearts to begin with, did we?
No, absolutely not. Actually, my mother was horrified that I majored in philosophy. That was just not what you did. So she was like not happy. But
why was she horrified?
Well, because she was from a generation that you went to school for like a tangible thing. Like you.
Wait, hold up, Debbie. My microphone just shifted off. 1 second. Okay. I'm going to stop 1 second. Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Sorry. I'm going to go back and ask that question again.
Okay.
Neil, if you're listening, my producer, I'm going to go back and ask the question again about how you got started in this field because my microphone cut out. My apologies. Okay. And in 3, 2, 1. So Debbie, tell us how you got into this field, because, you know, it was not a natural course back in the day to get started in data. You're a philosophy major. I was an anthropology major. How did you get there?
Yeah. Well, first of all, my mother was horrified that I majored in philosophy, just horrified.
And why was that?
Well, you know, back then people went to school for tangible things, like you were going to be a lawyer or a doctor or a plumber. You went to school to do that. So it was just too amorphous, I think. So she thought, oh, this is terrible. So, but you know, I think I've always had an interest in data. I was one of the kids that would fill out like the little slips in magazines to get magazines back. And I would like spell my name wrong just to see what would come back in the mail and different things like that. But what really started me on my data technology path was I was asked to help a library at the time move from card catalogs to databases, right? So back in the day, no, you're too young to remember when they had card catalogs in libraries.
Are you kidding me? I lived in the card catalog. You're looking at a 50-year-old woman. I'm very satisfied. I had the Dewey Decimal System memorized at one point. That's how much time I spent in the library. Big library.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I started, I've been, before it was digital transformation, it was just transformation, right? So
Right.
I was starting helping university libraries create databases of books, and moved on to helping companies manage like large types of digital assets and data in databases. And that got me interested in, privacy, because as we collect more data of individuals, it creates more privacy risks. So I sort of merged together my interest in technology and data with kind of a privacy practice. So that's what I work on now.
Wow. So it's funny, you think about having that conversation with your parents about majoring in philosophy. I know I was an anthropology major, and I can still remember my dad's doctor saying to him, "Oh, wow, Susie's going to be an anthropology major. She just bought herself a one-way ticket to the poorhouse." That was the conversation my dad was having. He was freaking out. So I empathize with you and your mom. So, but this transition into data, and we think about it now, the digital transformation was one of paper to digital assets, right?
Right.
And I mean, I think probably tangible for most people is your electronic health records, for example, right? That's a piece that we all know, or going into that library and suddenly using a computer instead of the card catalog. Today, for those of us working in innovation, those transformative systems around data are incredibly sophisticated. And yet data is becoming such a huge part of our lives. We had the head of data science from Amazon Web Services on the show, and she was telling us that the initial movement around data was to collect everything. And tell us, what are some of the pitfalls of that approach to going, well, if I just knew more, I could do more?
Yeah, right. Right. So that's kind of the traditional, or had been in the past, the big data story. It's like the more and more data that we get, the more insights that we can derive from that. And so not all data is good data, right? Just because you have a lot of data doesn't mean it's accurate, doesn't mean it's high quality. And then we're starting to see around the world regulations come into play to say, hey, if you have data of personally identifiable people, you have to restrict who has access to it. You have to limit how long you need it. So tying the data retention to a purpose, which was never done before. Like, people were stockpiling data and being, like, I say, hoarders, the corporate edition, where they just had no really reason to get rid of stuff. And now we're seeing a lot of this legacy data become not an asset, but a liability to companies, and they hold it too long. So it may be a liability in terms of, fines or problems with regulators around data privacy. It may be a cybersecurity risk. So the more data that companies keep and collect, especially if it has a low business value, I tell companies, data that has a low business value has a high business or cyber or privacy risk, because a lot of times companies, they don't protect that older data in the same ways. And then even though it may not be as valuable to the company, if it were able to get out to a bad actor, or if it was breached in some way, that would create a huge liability for the organization.
It's such a good reminder. Too much data has diminishing value and increased risk. And the longer you hold on to that data, the more risk you put the company at.
Exactly.
So, and getting people to part with that, is that kind of a, not for my dead hands kind of?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Someone actually told me that once.
They're like hoarders, right? I mean, like, if people get like a hoarding mentality around data.
Yeah, absolutely. They just think, I don't know, maybe it's like having a vintage car or something. You think, keep it forever. And it's like, no, data doesn't age well. It's not like fine wine,
Or me.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So, Debbie, this is fascinating. So when you think about some of the, one of the reasons I wanted to talk with you is that you've worked with some of the biggest and frankly most innovative companies in the world. We're going to withhold their names because the work that you do with them is so important and so protected and private. But you've worked with, let's say, one of the top ride sharing companies in the world that many of us have sat in before and gotten from point A to point B. Can you tell us a little bit about what does an engagement look like, a project when you're really trying to use data on the side of innovation? What's going on with a company that needs data on that level?
Yeah, I think it's really important to be able to tell a data story. So not thinking, I think the conventional wisdom was, let's just collect all this data, hoard it, and then we'll figure out what we want to do with it. And that's not the approach that you should take with data. It should be, what is your problem? What are you trying to solve? What do you think that you can do to move the business forward? And how does data help you tell that story? So in order to be able to, collect data and get the proper insights, you have to have an idea about what you think you find. It shouldn't be a surprise. For example, if you implement like an AI system or whatever, if the result that you get at the end is something unexpected, then that means something probably went wrong, right? You should say, okay, I'm looking for X, Y, and Z. If I put in these variables and I look at the data that I have, that result should be expected. It shouldn't be unexpected.
So you're not looking necessarily to prove a hypothesis. You are looking to ask the right questions and then let the data do the talking.
Absolutely. And it's easier to be able to have data help you tell that story. So like, for example, digital literacy is really critical. It's like a key business skill in this day and time that people never really thought about. So instead of someone saying, hey, I have a hunch, I have like a gut, feeling about something, you may be able to have data underpin your story and to help you tell that story. And maybe, a lot of times getting a project approved or being able to go forward with a particular innovation because you have that information.
So what's an example of what data literacy is? So for all of our listeners on the call, what should be the standard of data literacy?
Yeah, the standard of data literacy is really figuring out sort of what data is and what you can do with it. So can you use data to get like qualitative information or quantitative information? So people, when they think of data, they think about statistics, but not all data can be summed up in a statistic. Maybe it tells a story. So instead of saying there are 20 people in a classroom, you're saying maybe there are 10 people who are from El Salvador and 5 people who are from Europe or something like that. So being able to understand what story you can tell with data is very important, and also understanding, in my view, what is causation versus correlation. So just because, like, you say, oh, well, if there are 5 people in this classroom, they're from El Salvador, then people who are from South America like cooking. I don't know. That may not be the proper insight that you get from that type of data. So I think people understanding, first of all, organizations have data. I heard someone say, every company is a data company now, right? So every company has data of some sort. They may be able to get insights of some sort from the data that they have, but it's incumbent upon executives when they're in organizations to understand what data they have and what story that they think the data should be telling.
So our data literacy is about understanding the difference between quantitative and qualitative data, getting really clear about the questions that we want to ask of the data, and then leaving ourselves open to the potential outcome when we query that data to see what we might find, and
Absolutely.
to be open to the anomalies that may very well go against our gut.
Absolutely. And then on the back end is, were you successful? So if you're using data in terms of being the fuel for your innovation, are you going to be, what's your standard for success? What's your litmus test, I guess? And then how clear are your objectives and how you achieve it at the end is very important.
Okay, so let's get a little bit more granular. So this ride sharing company that you were working with, what were they hoping to achieve in working with the data diva?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of the things that we were trying to do is understand how to manage data, especially in different geographies or geographical locations. So, there are different laws and regulations around the world about how you handle data, how you collect data, what types of consent are needed. And so having those workflows, especially being tied to things like GPS, where people are located, what they're trying to do, what age they are, things like that, helping to sort of map out that plan and make it easy for the consumer to be able to go through that journey. Give, if, for example, if someone's in China, they're getting a ride in China, there may be certain things that may be requested of them based on kind of the government or different regulations there. It may be very different in the US or South America or Canada. So being able to work through that sort of question and answer or sort of consent versus notice thing, I think have been, very challenging. I think they've done a really good job at this.
And how does that relate to when you say, okay, I have 20 different geographies that allow me to collect different data sets. And now I have to make decisions about my business across wholly different data sets and figure out where I'm going to make investments, especially when it comes to innovation. How do you help people discern those different pools of data and to bring them together in a way that, a leader, an innovation leader, can really create cohesive strategy?
Yeah, I think just understanding what the data is and what story is trying to tell, and then what you want to achieve as a company. So let's say you want to achieve more growth in South America, or you want to achieve maybe change maybe the duration of people. Maybe people want to get, for example, instead of just short rides, maybe they want to do longer rides. So analyzing what the needs are in those areas, analyzing what kind of the business capability is, I think it has helped organizations be able to get closer to their customers and bring forward the type of innovation that people really gravitate towards.
So it's about refining the strategy as opposed to coming up with something completely new.
Oh, absolutely. Right. Like, where's the gap? That's what everyone wants to know. So where's the gap between where our customers are and where we want to be and how we want to be thought of in the public?
How does data work, Debbie, when you're going for like a moonshot idea, something that's completely different than what you might be doing currently? So many of our innovators, they have an innovation portfolio where they say, okay, we know the following is going to kind of work based on tests that we've done thus far. So we'll put about 50% of our innovation portfolio in stuff that we know, and that's incremental innovation. Then we'll do another 30% that has a 50-50 success rate. We don't really know if it will or won't work, but we want to give it a shot. And we have a really good hunch. And the last, 20% of the portfolio is going, let's swing for the fences. Let's try something that will take 5, 10, 15 years to achieve, but we need to get started now. Those are different phases of, a lot of our innovators in the audience. That's how they manage innovation at the corporate level. Where do you think data plays the best role in managing any of those three kinds of investments?
Yeah. Well, I think data has a different role in all those things. I think, especially when you're thinking about for the swing for the fences,
Yeah,
a
let's
lot of
talk about
times,
that. That's exciting.
yeah, it's exciting stuff that like going to the moon or something. It's definitely not easy. And a lot of times there may not be empirical data yet that can sort of prove your point. So you're probably creating things and testing. And there's this iterative process that you're going through to see, instead of saying, okay, let's go to the moon, there are many steps there in between from, the idea, do I have the right people? Do I have the right mindset? Is the company, is it still in scope with what the company wants to do? And trying to find kind of, in my view, those incremental wins or incremental successes to help show that you can kind of build towards that and definitely have the tenacity to continue. So I think, especially when you're thinking about those big ideas, those incremental wins are very important, and those step-by-step processes are very important, because instead of you traveling a road, you're probably building a road. So you have to go a bit slower, be more, I don't know, not necessarily circumspect, but be more, I don't know what the best word is, diligent in terms of what you see, always having the goal in mind, but understanding that it just takes a long time to get there. So being committed to that longer path is important.
So, and thinking about you have the ability to take the ear of Elon Musk, for example, right?
Yeah.
And you're going, all right, we're going to get to Mars, right? That's the goal. One day, Mars. All of those factors that you just mentioned, the people, the tech, the processes, all of that piece does it feel a little daunting to get started?
I think it always feels daunting to get started, but I mean, we wouldn't have the national highway system if people didn't think that they could do this, right? They had to start incrementally, right? They started in the smaller cities and connecting those things until we have what we have today in our national highway system. So I think, a big idea may seem daunting, but it really is those incremental pieces and being able to break that down and have successes along the way, and failures, right? Because not all innovation is successful, but
That's for sure.
But making sure that you're on a right path, that you're testing, and that you're always trying to move forward. So I think people say the best way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time, right? No one gets to the moon overnight. It doesn't, you can't just snap your fingers and get there. But if you're, dedicated to a process and being able to sort of test your assumptions and have some empirical evidence come out of that you can build upon the future, is the best way forward.
Yeah. So what happens when you get pushback? Like, what does it look like? In all innovation cases, right? We feel the politics of who owns the data, who's querying the data, who gets to tell the story of the data. Do you find in large organizations there's competition around the data and how to analyze it?
I think there is competition. Some of that comes from people who have their own preconceived notion. This goes back to this hunch thing again, where, I think this, and so what evidence do you have to base on that? Well, I just kind of think that's my gut feeling, that's my reaction. So I think the challenge in organizations is to not do this cowboy thing and really rely on the data to be able to help you tell whatever story that you're trying to do, as opposed to coming up with a story and then try to shoehorn the data into what you think.
So, especially when, you get into these portfolio discussions, I mean, there are major decisions that are getting made over data. What can we do to make sure that before we make those giant decisions, that the data is what it says it is?
I think the really important thing is to look at all the data. So don't put your blinders on and only look at the thing that reinforces your idea. If we're in an amazing technological age where we have capability to not only look at data and gather data, but be able to get insights almost in real or near real time that we didn't used to have before. So a lot of the insights we could get with data used to take years and years. Now it may take, hours or a couple of days to be able to get those insights. So having companies that can really leverage the data that they have, look at it more closely, get those insights, and not shy away from something that maybe there's an insight that came up that they didn't expect, or it doesn't really fit the conventional wisdom. Companies I feel that win in the innovation space are those who aren't afraid to look at something. Maybe their assumption was wrong, and then they have to change course.
That's really challenging, right? Because if you misinterpret the data, then there's a problem. So are there safety measures? Like, are there like, here's how we test it, here's how we make sure we're looking at the right thing in your line of work?
Yeah, definitely. So there's definitely testing. You're iterating. So you're, instead of making huge changes at once, you may be making changes incrementally. You may be testing things incrementally. I think you have to have the ability to change course. For example, let's say someone from your Mars analogy, maybe you need to go to the moon instead of to Mars. So maybe you need to change your scope or your field of vision based on the data that you have and the insights that you gain. And then also, I think, especially in this economy right now, I think companies need to recalibrate themselves, right? So let's say you have this big idea and then maybe you don't have the resources, people resources. Then maybe you can't go to the Mars. Maybe you have to just go to the moon based on what you have. So I think companies who are successful in innovation know that conditions change and they may have to adjust accordingly.
Yeah. So taking it down a notch, or know that our moonshot idea might take 3, 5, 7 years as opposed to the 1 to 3 year time frame that we hope for.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I know you've worked with some really big media providers as well, like, cable companies around the nation. What kind of data are they looking for from us, as we stick our heads in the television every day more and more deeply?
Well, a lot of these companies, they're moving into other innovation spaces that aren't kind of their traditional business. So I work a lot with companies that are working on smart city technology. So that may be traffic lights, bus stops, lighting systems, parking systems, anything that can help supposedly to help individuals do better in urban environments. Maybe they're measuring, for example, here's an interesting one. So let's say you have a garbage truck that takes pictures of the roads as they're driving. So they'll be able to tell, hey, this road has these potholes, and instead of the way we used to do it, like every 3 years, we'll go out to the street and we'll, patch up everything. We'll know, okay, well, every 6 months, this problem happens on this particular road. So that's a way that I'm seeing people use, emerging technologies to really help people in everyday problems.
So the data in these cases, like smart cities, right, is virtually every city, as with the advent of electronic vehicles, right, maybe even one day self-driving vehicles, is rethinking what it is to be a city.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So can you just tell us some of the data sets you might be collecting on looking at that? I mean, the obvious ones are like population or geography, but what are the things are data scientists thinking about that the rest of us are not?
Yeah, like, the traffic flow or the flow of people walking at the curb, or how many cars stop in certain locations, or, how people navigate around, big events and different things like that. So things where, for example, like, this is a good one. So like, let's say emergency vehicles. So having technology in place where an emergency vehicle goes into a traffic intersection, instead of them trying to wait for lights and move around people, the lights would change based on what they're doing and would sort of stop other traffic. So that can be very life-changing for people and life-saving to be able to use technologies for kind of traffic flow and those types of systems. So to me, that's a really cool innovation.
Yeah, and by the same token, maybe fewer cars on the road, right? We
Mhm.
have to go to the exact opposite of our contention that maybe there will be more cars because maybe there will be fewer cars as a result of us getting smarter as citizens.
Absolutely, or different transportation options. So not everyone is going to be driving. So I've seen a lot more scooters, a lot more foot traffic, a lot more places where people may do public transit. So having all those people converge in different areas and have a flow that works maybe like rethinking the way we think about urban environments.
That's right. And we had the head of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory on the show, and I asked him, how do we even envision, the next 50 years of space travel? How do we even think about that? And he said, there's a lot of imagining that goes on. We employ Hollywood screenwriters, we talk to futurists, we talk to people in conjunction with our scientists here at NASA to dream about what that future looks like. How do you create data sets around the dream of where we hope it might go? How do you begin to collect data on things that do not yet exist as innovators, right? That's some of the stuff we really want to know that gets us excited.
Yeah, well, I love that space. So because I work in emerging technologies, I'm often working on things that don't exist yet. So for me, that's really
everyone listening, by the way. So
yeah, that's really fun for me to definitely imagine. I think part of it is, the technological capabilities are getting more advanced. The types of computing that exist that people will have access to is getting more advanced. I don't know, a few years ago, people may not have, 10 years ago, people may not have imagined that they can use their smartphone to have a car or a cab pick them up. That was just ridiculous. That was crazy talk back then. But as the technology started advancing, people started imagining the advances and the cool things that they could do with technology. So I think we're reaching a level, in my view, of like exponential growth in computing. And so we'll be able to do all types of crazy things that we never even imagined before because the technology is there. So it just takes someone who has enough know-how about how the technology works to think about, oh, well, we could do this or we could do that. So I'm excited about the future in terms of how people are going to be able to leverage these advancements in technologies and dream big.
So that means data scientists can even figure out data sets or collect data on things that don't yet exist?
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's collecting data on things that don't exist yet, but I think it's collecting data like in a way so that they can say, okay, we have this new technology that we didn't have before. We have this data that tells us that maybe there's this problem that never could be solved with traditional computing, and then maybe put those things together. So being able to join maybe an old idea with something that was never thought of before. So I think of the idea about autonomous vehicles, like that's a big one, right? So no one, well, before we had the technology to make a car or automobile that could be autonomous, people kind of thought, well, that would be a cool idea, but we don't have the technology to do it. So now that we are at the age where the technology is rapidly increasing and improving and getting more sophisticated, you can dream those big dreams.
Yeah. So this is also fascinating. So we're getting to the end of our show where we typically ask all of our guests 3 very important innovation questions. So I'll ask them of you as well, Debbie. So the first question is, if you could join, what do you think? I'll ask this question. What do you think is the greatest innovation of all time? And you can give us any of your top 3.
Oh, 3. Oh, great. That's a great question. Let's see, the top 3 innovations of all time. I think probably the Gutenberg press, being able to put words into print. I would say personal computers. So computers that weren't just for corporations, but to put computing in people's hands. And then the smartphone, I think. So there's a computer in your pocket as opposed to one that's on your desk. And we're going to see a lot more innovation in the future with like the metaverse and stuff like that, that will really our phones are going to be able to do more things than it does now. And, it's going to be interesting to see how that works out.
Yeah, I often say to people, the least used app on my phone is the phone. I
Yeah.
pretty much spend most of my time on my phone not calling people and not picking up the phone. So
Yeah.
I don't even know if we're going to be calling it a phone, but I'm always intrigued by how slow we are as humans to let go of the names and the stories we have around our devices, or our apps, right? I mean, we still call it email, and is the farthest thing away from a letter with a postage stamp on it. Okay. So
great. I know. I agree.
Great answers to those questions. So if you could join an innovation team in human history, which team would you want to be on?
Say a team that so I would love to join an innovation team that was helping to solve a real world problem. So like I get really excited about, I think I saw some studies or saw some things in the news about researchers trying to find ways to take the salt out of salt water to create more drinking water in the world. That's a cool thing, right? That's something that really help people.
Salinization, absolutely.
Yeah, so that would be awesome. Something that can really, a way that you can really leverage technology and innovation to help people with real world problems.
Okay, and then finally, what's a pet peeve of yours or something you just wish existed in the world that hasn't yet been invented?
Oh, wow, that's interesting. Let's see. The thing that I wish in the world, well, a lot of people have smart speakers. I don't. I'm more of a tinfoil hat person, frankly. But when that technology gets sophisticated enough where I can say, go wash my car, then I'll be like, yeah, I'm all for it, right? So until it gets that sophisticated, I won't have one.
And is there an innovation you'd love to see? That is fantastic. So you want an actual physical response to your challenge. So
yes,
like Grubhub is actually a physical response, right? You could actually say, hey, McDonald's, bring me over a Happy Meal. And it does.
Yeah, I need my innovation to do real world tasks. So like wash the dishes or
there you go.
Yeah, something really, clean out my closet.
Thank you. Right. Pay my bills. Let's go.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, well, Debbie Reynolds, it has been such an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for joining me. How can people get in touch with you if they need to meet the data diva herself?
Sure. Well, people can always catch me at my website, DebbieReynoldsConsulting.com. And I am very active on LinkedIn. Just type in Debbie Reynolds Data Diva and I pop right up. And I'm happy to chat with people and have cool conversations.
Fantastic. And don't forget the podcast. If you want to get a deeper dive into great data, then Debbie's podcast is the best. Debbie, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. And this is a fantastic subject. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you.